The Philadelphia Eagles take down another pretender with yet another dominating performance. Saquon Barkley is finally getting MVP love. The Rams fans get reminded that they're a 500 football team, and the Eagles are getting serious consideration as the best team in the league. Welcome to the Philly Film Room Podcast. I'm Nick Waters, and we have yet another review of a dominating performance by this Philadelphia Eagles team. And they've really been dominating in a historic fashion. If you look at Jimmy Kempsey's tweet that he's posted, and a number of other people have said this as well, the Eagles are outscoring and outgaining their opponents by a significant margin, by over 1,200 yards during their win streak. The next closest team is around 500 yards that they've outgained their opponent, right? And before we go any further, I just want to take a moment and remind people to savor and live in the moment. You don't get seasons like this very often. I know we were spoiled. We had the 2022 season, and yes, at the end of the day, winning the Super Bowl is always the goal. But the thing is, you're only going to win the Super Bowl so many times, right? If you're going to go out there and say every season is a failure and the years that you don't win a Super Bowl, well, you're going to be a pretty sad sports fan. So when you see those moments of Saquon Barkley breaking off multiple 70-yard touchdown runs in the same game, listen, that doesn't happen very often. Teams dominating to this degree hardly ever happens. So enjoy it in the moment. But yes, we do still have bigger goals of winning the Super Bowl, right? So let's review this game and see what the Eagles did to come out with such a big, convincing victory on the road. First of all, we have to start with the offense. And if we start with anyone other than Saquon Barkley, we're just bearing the lead, right? Saquon had 302 yards total from scrimmage, 255 rushing yards, which is a franchise record, and another 47 receiving yards. I mean, this guy can really do it all, and his game has been elevated coming to this Eagles team. I think part of that has to do with playing behind an offensive line that is allowing him a ton of space to work. And I think part of it, we have to give some love to Jamal Singleton as the running backs coach. He has gotten the best out of every single running back that has come through this building. You see Miles Sanders go from being a back averaging over 5 yards per carry in the majority of his seasons with the Eagles to then playing for the Panthers, getting a big contract with the Panthers, and then being relegated to their number 3 back. DeAndre Swift comes over from Detroit. He was traded away. They didn't feel he was worth it, right? He also played behind a good offensive line in Detroit, but he comes to the Eagles, his vision gets much better. I think we're seeing the same thing with Saquon Barkley as well. The guy is just playing with a lot of patience, a lot of confidence, and he's seeing the field really well right now. So I think part of that love needs to go to Jamal Singleton as well. But at the end of the day, it is the players on the field that matter. And Saquon has been one of the best players at any position in the NFL this season. But part of that love has to go to the offensive line as well. Saquon averaged 3.6 yards before contact per carry, according to Next Gen Stats, and that was second among qualifying backs in Week 12. And it's not like they played any slouch on the Rams. The Rams, coming into this game, were 5th in yards before contact per attempt allowed, according to Sports Info Solutions. This offensive line is dominating, even good competition. And then you get Saquon in the open field, and he is the best open field runner in the NFL. His athleticism to outrun people, his ability to cut and immediately burst is elite. He has phenomenal creativity in the open field, and he also has the strength to run through tackles, whether they're tackles from corners and safeties or from linebackers as well. So we're just seeing a special performance from Saquon Barkley right now. The offensive line was also really good in pass protection. We talked about it coming into this game. Depending on where you looked, really no matter where you looked, whether it was PFF, Next Gen Stats, Sports Info Solutions, the Rams were top 2 in pressure rate. But the Eagles' offensive line held the Rams to their 5th lowest pressure rate of the season, their 2nd lowest sack rate of the season, and their longest time to pressure. The Eagles' offensive line really locked up the Rams' pass rushers all game long. There's a couple wins here and there by Braden Fisk and by Jared Verse, but we talked about it coming into this game, that a lot of the pressures that they were generating was based on stunts and line movement. It wasn't so much that they were beating guys one-on-one. Did they have those wins on tape? Yes, and especially Jared Verse. But with Jared Verse, it was a lot of him blowing through offensive tackles, especially weak offensive tackles that couldn't hold up to his power. Well, Jordan Mailata can hold up to that. We did see the one play of Jordan Mailata getting put on his back. That was more so a great get off by Jared Verse. And listen, sometimes guys get you, right, when they're good players as well. But for the most part, everyone on the offensive line held their own against the Rams pass rushers. And again, the Rams didn't really have, like, their pass rushers don't have big, diverse skill set, and that's to be expected since all of their players are second year or younger players, all of their main players. But in addition to that, the Eagles' offensive line did a good job handling the Rams' stunts. And you can't just come in and say, we're going to stop this team because they're running stunts. You have to be able to communicate and pass off those stunts. And the Eagles' offensive line did an excellent job with that. Now, I do think the play calling helped out the offensive line as well, as the Eagles' offense was second in play action rate among any team in Week 12. That helped to slow down the pass rush, and it obviously paired well with their run-first approach. Now, looking at Jalen Hurts, I thought he was very efficient in the pass game. He only had 26 dropbacks, which led to 179 passing yards, but it was his second highest EPA per pass this season. He didn't really force anything or put the ball in harm's way very much, and he had his lowest average depth of throw this season. When he was pressured, he was able to get out of trouble pretty easily and quickly. Now, he did have an errant throw to Dallas Goedert in the end zone, and he left one pass behind A.J. Brown, but really, we're just nitpicking at that point in time. Jalen played a really efficient game, and he had a strong connection with A.J. Brown. The Eagles schemed up a lot of easy plays for them as well. There was a lot of easy plays on slants, on drag routes. They utilized some play action to open up passing windows on dig routes over the middle. They used a condensed split crossing route, which allowed A.J. Brown an easier release and better leverage to run that crossing route. And then they paired it with the delayed rollout from Jalen Hurts to get him outside of the pocket. There was also a big play on a curl route. There really wasn't any plays where he was asked to go through and put the ball into tight windows, right? It was easy plays for this Eagles offense. He also had a beautiful dime to A.J. Brown on the corner route for the touchdown, and A.J. Brown had 109 of Jalen's 179 passing yards. If we weren't talking about Saquon Barkley, if Saquon didn't have as big of a game as he had, this would have been an A.J. Brown game. We probably would have been leading with that, right? Because A.J., for his part, stepped up as well, making multiple guys miss and creating a lot of yards after the catch as well. You only get that with certain players in the league, and Chris Collinsworth said it best. Some guys you can't cover, and some guys you can't tackle, and A.J. Brown is both. You can't cover that guy, and you can't tackle him as well. Now, outside of A.J. Brown, they had a diverse rotation of their skill players, whether that was Johnny Wilson playing, Jahan Dotson playing, Anaya Smith got some snaps, Britton Covey got some snaps as well. I did think it was interesting. Dallas Goedert actually saw a drop in his snap share this week from about 88% to 75%, so I thought that was notable. After his first catch of the game, he came out of the game immediately, so I wonder if he is dealing with some injury there and they're trying to limit some of his snaps. But Grant Alcantara got some snaps, CJ Uzoma got some snaps. We saw towards the end of the game, Bam Bam Van Sumeren came in and got to play some as well. So we got to see a rotation from this team. But at the end of the day, the Eagles found a way to game plan and get their superstars involved, and that was a big factor for the Eagles scoring on offense. Now, some of the other things that I did like, I liked both screenplays to Saquon. One of the screenplays where Saquon slipped, I really liked that, and I hope we see that play again. It would have been one of those plays where Saquon just needed to make one guy miss, and he's probably walking in for a touchdown, but it really builds off of their orbit motion series that they've been running this season. It'll force the defense to have to honor the bubble screen one way while throwing a screen the other way. It creates tremendous horizontal stretch on the defense. I hope that's something we see continue to get included in the game plan. Now, I will say this, early in the game, it's not like they were blocking bad, but they weren't sustaining blocks as well as they were in the second half. Once they started sustaining those blocks, we saw Saquon have a ton of space to work, and we saw Saquon able to rip off a number of explosive runs. And we talked about it coming into this game. The Rams were top 5 in explosive run rate allowed. But when you're playing a team like the Eagles with a back like Saquon and an offensive line like we have, it's really just a matter of time until we're able to bust out a long run. Especially, you see this Rams team on the back end and coverage, they did a horrible job with slowing guys down after the catch. That really translated over when the Eagles were able to get Saquon in space, right? So it was just a matter of time until Saquon was able to bust a big run. But one thing I didn't like was the end of half situation. Number one, what is the upside going for it on fourth down right there? It's just a bad job of risk management at that point in time. I will say this, they were one block away from this being a long run on the quarterback draw, and we did see a similar big play against the Chicago Bears in the 2-minute drill in 2022. But when they called that quarterback draw, that wasn't on 4th down, right? So I don't know why they called that there. And it's plays like that that gets people against Nick Sirianni when he's sitting there trying to outsmart everybody in the room. He does a great job of getting this team prepared to play. His winning speaks for itself, but it's these little plays that gets the public perception against Sirianni. And it's those decisions are indefensible at a certain point in time, especially that one right there. So I don't really understand the upside, but I don't want to end on a negative note, especially when the offense overall had such a big day. But we do need to move on to the defensive side of the ball. On defense, they held the Rams to their 3rd lowest yardage total of the season. The other 2 games came in games when they didn't have Cooper Kupp or Puka Nacua. So really, this was the worst offensive performance by the Rams in a game where they were at full strength. The Rams' 5 sacks allowed was also tied for the highest of the season, so this pass rush was still getting after it. So what did the Eagles do to slow down the Rams' attack? Well, in the past game, the Eagles used a lot of coverages that would have the safety play as a robber, essentially. So what I mean by this is in cover 1, instead of having the extra defender be the linebacker that is patrolling the short to intermediate area, they would have a safety rotate from the top down to patrol the intermediate area. That helps put a player in the area and take away a lot of the crossing routes and the in-breaking routes that the Rams like to utilize. Now, in addition to that, in zone coverage, they would do the same thing. They would play cover 3 buzz, where instead of having 2 linebackers play as a hook defenders, 1 linebacker would be a hook defender, and the other safety, one of the safeties rotating down, would be the other hook defender. Again, that puts a safety right in the spot to take away crossing routes as well. In addition to that, they played a good amount of split field safety coverages, and in the same vein, that oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, allows the safety to sit in the middle of the field and patrol and look for crossing routes and breaking routes. So I thought the Eagles did a good job with their coverages and trying to take away the bread and butter of the Rams attack, and that really forced them to go to other options and check the ball down and throw it underneath. Now, early in the game, the run defense was a little suspect. The Rams had their highest yards per carry of the season on any game, but a lot of that was due to what happened in the first quarter. The run fits were poor, especially with some of their nickel corners and their safeties trying to fit on those insert blocks from receivers. But the Rams averaged 8.7 yards per carry in the first quarter. They averaged 2.8 yards per carry the rest of the game. So slow first quarter for this Eagles run defense, but they got back to what they have been doing for much of the season after the bye week, right, with their run defense. Now, looking at some of the individual performances, the Rams gave Jalen Carter a lot of attention in pass pro. They were sliding the line to him a ton, and it was highlighted in the broadcast how often Jalen Carter was getting double teamed. As a result, Milton Williams and the opposite defensive tackles were getting a lot of one-on-one opportunities, and Milton Williams in particular stepped up, getting a lot of pressures, and he ended up with 2 sacks in this game. As the game went on, Fangio started utilizing different fronts and stunts to take advantage of the slide. I do wish we had seen some of that a little bit earlier in the game, but at the end of the day, once you started seeing Fangio utilize those different fronts and utilize all those different stunts, we saw the Eagles get a lot of easy pressures. In addition to that, the Eagles utilized Nakobe Dean as a blitzer. He ended up with a sack, and he was running through Kyren Williams several times in this game. And Kyron's probably seeing Nakobe Dean in his nightmares because he was getting lit up by him. He also drew another holding penalty on a center when he was blitzing as well. So again, this was just a great game from Dean overall, and it really highlighted his strengths as a blitzer. I hope that's something we continue to see. And as we get to and talk about the Brandon Graham injury later in the season, I think we're going to start seeing a little bit more of this action from this Eagles defense. Now, Cooper DeJean had a couple really nice plays, especially on one play in particular, locking up Cooper Kupp in man coverage one-on-one. He really blanketed Cooper Kupp and won that battle. He also did a really good job of undercutting Puka Nacua on a corner route. But I will say this was probably one of his worst games as a pro. He was out of position a couple times in the run fits. He was beaten coverage a few times. Some of those plays we talked about just getting out leveraged to the flat. But he was also involved in a play where he should have given up a touchdown, but Matt Stafford underthrew a deep ball pretty significantly. But this is to be expected. You're going to get rookie mistakes. I thought this was just a good learning experience overall for Cooper DeJean, and he's going to be a better player for it. So I don't have any real concerns long term with DeJean's performance in this game, and really encouraged with a number of the plays that he did make. I know the fans are going to talk a lot about some of the penalties that happened in the game. The Eagles also were a benefit of some of the ref decisions as well, such as Nick Sirianni being able to change his mind on whether he wants to accept a penalty or not, right? But I will say this, in regards to the Isaiah Rodgers pass interference, I do think the play was pass interference. They did keep seeing replays of the catch point, but I thought there was a point in time when you go back and look at the film where he kind of impeded his progress and slowed him down just a little bit earlier in that rep. But regardless, the coach in the film meetings isn't going to sit there and be like, oh, poor Isaiah Rodgers, that shouldn't have been a penalty. No, he's going to coach him up, and he's going to emphasize on the technique and what he should have done to put himself in a better position, because at the end of the day, he was in a bad position and he did panic a little bit, and he made it look like he was in a situation where he was interfering with the receiver, right? Don't put yourself in those positions to give the ref a reason to make that call, right? Number one, on that play, he was coming in cold during the game. That is just hard to deal with when you've been sitting on the sideline for the vast majority of the game, and all of a sudden you got to go into the game due to injury. That there's a reason why teams right away tend to attack the corner that's coming in for the injured player. Number one, generally they're worse players, right? But they're also cold. They've been sitting on the sideline. They're not ramped up and ready to go. The Rams came out, they attacked Isaiah Rodgers right away. He got better as the game went on. I think predictably so when a guy gets a little bit more warmed up and gets back into the flow of the game. But on that play, Puka Nacua just ran right by him. And to make matters worse, Isaiah Rodgers has the makeup speed to get back in phase, but he needed to stack on top of the top shoulder of Puka Nacua. And then he got his eyes back too quickly, and that anytime you get your eyes back to the quarterback, that is going to slow you down. He lost position, and then he panicked a little bit late, and then you see the penalty come out. So I know a lot of people are going to blame the refs for this or that. Good coaches aren't going to sit there and let you blame the refs. They're going to point at you and look at your technique and ask, what could you have done better to avoid being in that situation in general, right? And I think there were things that Isaiah Rodgers could have done better in that situation. But overall, like I said, I think he did come out later in other drives and perform better in the game. And let's not forget, he did have that huge forced fumble early in the game to end the Rams' first drive. So that was a big play by Isaiah Rodgers. Now, I do think this was a Brandon Graham legacy game. This is for more than one reason, right? Number one, it was just a big game by Brandon Graham in the first place. He was disruptive in the run game and the pass game. He had constant pressures, a number of big tackles for loss, or plays where he forced the runner to be tackled for a loss. It's just unfortunate if this is how it ends for him. And I do say if because he said if as well. So maybe there is a comeback. He's playing really well. If you go back and look at all the Brandon Graham games, that has to be one of the better games that he's had in his career. And he's doing it at his age. The enthusiasm that he shows, how much love and how much fun he's having playing the game. I wouldn't be surprised if he does come back. But if he doesn't, listen, has nothing left to prove. He is one of the best players in Philadelphia Eagles history, and he will always be welcome in the city. He wants to hang it up and call it a day. Well, props to the legend of Brandon Graham. But that does leave the Eagles thin at edge, especially with Bryce Huff being out for a significant period of time coming up. I do expect there's going to be either a free agent signing or a call-up from the practice squad. Maybe it's Teron Jackson that gets called up from the practice squad. Anyone that followed the podcast throughout the preseason knows that I was a big fan of Teron Jackson. I thought he should have made the team as a sixth edge rusher over Patrick Johnson, but he was cut. He went to the Panthers, and now he's back on the practice squad. I will say this. I don't expect a huge impact in the game if he does play. I think it's going to be mainly him taking some extra reps to give guys some breathers. At the end of the day, guys that have bounced around throughout the years, throughout their career, practice squad to practice squad, generally aren't guys that are going to come in and make a huge impact in the NFL. There's a difference in excelling against other backup caliber players and then having to go and play some of the elite offensive tackles in the league that you're going to have to face, right? So I don't expect a huge impact. There are some guys in free agency. I know a number of guys are going to get named, like Jason Pierre-Paul. He's a free agent. He was with the Dolphins and Vic Fangio last year, but he was waived after 2 games. So I don't know if they necessarily want to bring him back. What are some things that the Eagles can do to scheme around the loss of Brandon Graham and the loss of Bryce Huff so that they can continue getting some pressure from their edge rushers? Number one, they can utilize Zach Bond on the edge a little bit more. And we saw that to an extent in this game as well. Sweat can kick inside, and he's done that a number of times. And if things are dire, Zach Bond could play full-time on the edge, and you could see Oren Burks play at linebacker, but I don't think that's going to be something that they use long-term because you don't want to make yourself weaker at linebacker just so you can get marginally better at edge rusher. But I do think we can see some more internal pressures from their linebackers, particularly Nakobe Dean. He is a good blitzer. He creates pressure, and especially when you can get him matched up against running backs, and especially smaller running backs like Kyron Williams, those guys are not able to handle the physicality that Nakobe Dean brings as a blitzer. So I hope we see more of those pressures from their linebackers. And then what you get with that is you see their edge rushers dropping into coverage and getting into throwing windows that the quarterbacks didn't expect those players to be in as well. It gets the quarterbacks to hold the ball for just a second longer as you got Nakobe Dean blasting through a running back right in front of them. Now, I do think they'll run more stunts to scheme up more pressure for Jalen Hunt and for Nolan Smith, really take advantage of their athleticism, right? You see, like with the Rams, they went out and got a lot of elite athletic edge rushers for their defense, and then they run a ton of stunts with those guys. The reason they're able to get so much pressure, like we talked about in the preview podcast, is their use of stunts. The Eagles can utilize that to some degree to help generate some pressures with their guys. But overall, I think they'll be okay with Jalen Hunt taking more snaps. I don't think how this team is going to replace Brandon Graham, or the best way to replace Brandon Graham, is bringing in some veteran that is, let's be honest, washed up at this point in time. Help your ascending player, your young ascending player, get better. And the best way for an ascending player to get better, for a young player to get better, is for them to get playing time. Playing time is the best practice and the best learning experience for these players. So let Jalen Hunt get playing time. There's a reason they drafted him where they drafted him, despite him having very little experience at the position. He had some great traits coming out of college as an edge rusher, and we're seeing that play out on the field right now. Hunt had some impressive pass rushes against the Rams. I liked one rep in particular where he had a cross chop and then immediately transitioned into a bull rush and knocked the offensive lineman back and got a hit on the quarterback. Stafford just got the ball out of his hands pretty quickly on that play. He's done a really good job in the run game as well, and I expect that will continue to develop and grow the more that he plays. And in addition to that, Nolan Smith has been winning more consistently as well. So I don't think we need to freak out about edge rusher right now. Are there going to be some bumps and bruises along the way? Yes, but this team is going to be better off in the long run by getting these guys more reps earlier in their career. So overall, I'm not that concerned in the short term with this Eagles edge rush unit. And again, they'll get Bryce Huff back, and he will have an impact as a pass rusher as well. Now, I do think it's important that we pay attention to Jalen Carter and his practice status this week. It looked like he might have hyperextended his knee on the last play that he had in this game. He didn't come back into the game at that point in time, but at that point in the game, the Eagles were up big, so they put in their backup defensive line. So we won't know until the practice reports come out if there was a injury to Jalen Carter, but it didn't look good. I don't think it's anything long-term. Some guys can hyperextend their knees and come back in the same game. It really just depends on the severity of the injury, but that is something to pay attention to. And it's something that's going to be important to pay attention to because we are playing a team coming up in the Baltimore Ravens that is going to be one of the biggest tests that the Eagles will face this year. The Ravens are legit Super Bowl contending team. Especially on their offense. There's some issues that they have on their defense, especially in their secondary, but they are going to be a Super Bowl contending team. This is going to be a huge test for this Eagles team coming up. But that will be it for us today. And as always, make sure to like, subscribe, and spread the word. And until next time, go Birds.